Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Stedman podcast. I hope you are having a wonderful day. I am not in my usual office. I am actually on vacation down in the Panhandle of Florida, which is so. This is not a Zoom background. This is all real behind me. Just like everything behind Micah is very real. Being in Ohio, enjoying the air conditioned. How hot is it in Ohio right now?
Um, it's 75 right now, but we're supposed to get up to 86 today.
Okay, I think it's 84 right now. It's probably going to get up to at least 98 degrees down here in Florida. Um,
That shouldn't
but
surprise
yeah,
anybody.
what was that?
That shouldn't surprise anybody.
No, I mean, what was surprising is when it was really hot up in Ohio, how it was cooler in Puerto Rico when I was down there for missions trip.
Oh
Like
yeah.
that was weird. But yeah, so today we're going to be talking about an interesting topic, and this is mainly for those of you who may be leaders in the church, but you're not on pastoral staff, whether you're kind of like youth workers or maybe you're Sunday school teachers. But one of the things that I have come across recently is there's been people who have been coming out saying that they have been dismissed from their teaching duties, or sometimes even asked to leave the church because they were teaching either curriculum or they're using some type of Bible study tools that the leadership or the pastoral staff or the elders of the church did not like. So they asked them that they could no longer teach, or worst case scenario, asked them that they had to leave the church entirely. Um, so this is something that I personally have never experienced, but over the many years of ministry, I have had conversations with people who have had that experience happen to them. That they were asked that they were not allowed to teach this curriculum, or they were asked that they had to leave the church, or that they were no longer allowed to teach, or no longer to have this small group anymore. Um, and that was kind of a lot of the conversations I have had in the past. So, Micah, have you I mean, is this something you've heard of in your experience in ministry, or just talking with other colleagues in ministry where people have been asked to not teach a certain thing or not use a certain like commentary or Bible study tool, or even just completely told them they had to leave the church or leave their small group because they didn't like the teaching that they were doing?
I haven't personally had that happen, but I've heard of stories that where um people have been asked to leave, people have been asked to um change the curriculum that they're using, change the version of Bible that they're teaching from. Um, that's a big one that I've heard and dealt with over the years. Um, the you know, some churches still very much believe in KJV, which is crazy to think about in 2025.
Yeah.
Um, but as far as, personally dealing with that kind of stuff, I haven't. But I can see where that kind of thing may be necessary, especially if somebody's teaching stuff that's not accurate, stuff that goes against the theology of the church, stuff that goes against the beliefs of the church that you're a part of. And and if that's the case, then you need to have that conversation with that layperson and say, hey, that's not what we believe. This is what we believe. And if this is what we believe, then we need to be teaching that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's kind of you mentioned something about, sometimes there's things that may go against what the church believes or what the denomination believes, or against, basic foundational Christian theology. Um, and I can see that. I think there was an experience one time where someone that both you and I know was doing a Bible study curriculum on sex and dating or something. And I believe it's been a long time, but I think there are people who were part of their teaching team that were like, we don't feel comfortable teaching this. And they're like, well, we're going to do this anyway. And eventually it got to the point where I think those who were higher up on the power chain in the church basically said, nah, you're not going to teach this. And then it kind of just dissolved after that. So I can see stuff like that where you have someone who's teaching something, and even after, maybe the teaching team's not comfortable with it and may want to do something different, or may want to take a moment to really look through everything to teach us, make sure everything is sound within the church. I can see that something like that being shut down because people aren't doing their due diligence or making sure it's going through proper channels to make sure, okay, we got approval to teach this curriculum, especially as a small group leader. You are representing, even though you have your own small group and you're kind of like your own little community, you still represent the larger church or denomination that you're a part of. So sometimes the teaching that you do has to be um, in line with the church that you go to. Um, but I can also see how sometimes there's times where the teaching curriculum is not bad. It doesn't go against anything, but because you have people who don't necessarily understand it, or because it's maybe newer technology, that they could get very skeptical and might want to shut everything down. So for an example, when I lived in Virginia, there was a guy who played on my rugby team who went to a pretty big Baptist church in our town. And we were talking, and he said in his small group they were doing the curriculum Secret Church by David Platt. And it was just something about, in the whole curriculum, and I never took the curriculums, so I don't know, but the whole curriculum was more based on trying to, be kind of like an underground church, not in a sense of being a whole new entity, but kind of doing things in a way that's non-traditional for churches when it comes to evangelism and reaching out and spreading the gospel. Well, some of the elders of the church got wind about this curriculum, and just because the name was called Secret Church, the elders thought that this was a coup, that the small group was going to start their own church plant and separate from the church. And even not only the teachers of this small group, but even people in there like had a meeting with the whole elder board and said, hey, here's the curriculum, here's what it is, here's what it is not, and even played like a segment of the video just kind of showing them this is not a blueprint to start our own church. We don't want the responsibility of starting our own church. Like, we are content with here is just, this is something for us to be effective to preach the gospel in order to bring people into the church. And even after all this delegation and kind of trying to ease the fears of this elder board, they were still like, no, you cannot teach this. And then that was it. And it was done. And I'm not sure what the fallout was from that, but the fact that they kind of shut it all down over something. And really, I think it was just more based out of fear than anything on why the elder board shut down, because they didn't understand. And even when you tried to explain to them, they're still like, well, no, we don't like this because, either A, they're embarrassed that they got the whole thing wrong, and so they don't want to admit that they're embarrassed and be humble about it, or B, they're just like, well, they're saying this, but we don't really trust them, so we're still going to shut it down because we think they're trying to build their own church. And it's stuff like that where I go, you know, that's kind of ridiculous to be honest. Like, you have to like, trust the people who you put on these teams. They're not just random people from your church that start in these small groups. These are people that you pick to start them because you trust them and you believe that these are people of integrity and they do a great job and they can do community building. So let
You
them do
haven't
what they
trained
need to do.
them?
They even train them too. Like this is, I mean, I would be shocked that a church this size with this much, who has had the history of planning churches around in the area before, that they would simply not train these people on how to teach. That's something you don't see in mid-sized to small churches. It's just it's just ridiculous, man.
Well, I mean, I agree. I mean, like if you have all those resources, then why aren't you training your folks?
Yeah. And 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 I think that's the other thing too. Like if you're getting mad about people teaching something that's going against what you guys are trying to teach, is that a is that a the teacher's problem, or is that the leadership's problem for not training their people? Making sure that they've taken a new member class, or they've taken if they say they want to be a small group leader, taking a small group leader and kind of going through, here's the things that we want you to teach, here's the things that we feel like, again, here's what we believe you should be teaching, stuff that kind of fits in alignment with our core values of a church. So if you're a very conservative church and you are, if you're someone who's like very big in the sanctity of life and every kid should have life, then don't be teaching controversial material about how abortions are okay. Like that's probably not something you will need to be teaching in the church, especially in a church that size. Same thing if you're more in a liberal church, then you probably don't want to be teaching probably don't want to be teaching, I don't know, like very conservative teachings, like I don't know, like creationism and all that stuff, because that's not gonna fly with those type of beliefs. I think I think like when it comes to teaching material, yeah, it really boils down to, did you train your people well so that you don't have these issues? Because if you're going to tell someone they can no longer teach or ask them to leave the church, for me, it's not their fault unless they actually went through the class, knows what they do and they can and cannot teach, and decided to do it, go rogue anyway. Then yeah, you probably want to say, okay, you're done. But if they're doing everything that they're supposed to do and you just don't like the material because you think a title of the material means something different than what it is, and you're ignorant to learn, then and be educated yourself, then I think that's a problem as well. And then
Yeah.
the
I mean, it's
yeah,
honestly, I don't think you would have a problem unless somebody absolutely went, like you use the word rogue. I don't
yeah,
think it would be a problem unless somebody absolutely went rogue.
yeah. And then when it comes to Bible study tools, I think this is probably the weirdest one, because I mean, I can understand using curriculum that may go against certain things, but then when you're using Bible study tools, meaning you're using um, a certain translation in the Bible, or using a commentary, a lexicon, a Bible dictionary. Like, very rarely do I come across, especially in all my secondary, post-secondary, post-grad education. That's the word I was looking for. Post-grad education and even doctorate education. Am I coming across biblical tools that are controversial? I mean, I'm not being told in seminary that I should use this Bible dictionary versus using a different Bible dictionary. I mean, the only time I've been told to be careful about a thing would be the Theological Dictionary of the New Testament by Kittle. And the only reason why that is that sometimes Kittle, because he was a Nazi synthesizer, a lot of his reflections, there's a lot of his point of views on Jewish and Jewish culture may be a little bit more negative, maybe a little bit more biased than everything else. But they still don't say, do not use this. They say, be careful with what you're using in there. Like, we again, we know you're grad students, we know you're doctoral students, we know that you can differentiate between, biased and what's biased and what's not. So they never told us we can't use it. They actually say it's still considered one of the best theological dictionaries in the New Testament, even though there is some bias to it. So, with all that being said, when people are being taken out because of tools that they're being used, to me, that's just a real head scratcher for me, because I don't see how proper tools are being, if you're using proper tools, how that could be controversial to the point where you're being told you can't teach anymore or you're being kicked out of a church.
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy to think that people get that wound up over those things. Um, and like personally, I think that I would, if I were like a lead pastor, or if I was on staff, we were having an issue with a person teaching or leading a Sunday school class or a small group or something like that, and they were going kind of against the grain of what we were trying to teach, I would meet with them, make sure they understand. I would try to do my very best to make sure that they're okay with what we're teaching before making a huge scene, before thinking, hey, we're going to split the church. Hey, we're going to, people are going to leave because we let this person go. It's just, I think there are steps that you can take.
Mm-hmm.
And, back to the commentaries, like, I remember when I was in seminary, like, it was just, we were encouraged to use as many different types of commentaries and Bible dictionaries and online sources and stuff as possible when we were doing exegetical work because you want to do that research, you want to do the due diligence. And, you know, I've picked up commentaries and I've read stuff and I'm like, it's not that I don't agree with this, it's just I don't like how it's written.
Yeah.
And, the same with, um, you know, doing further research. It's like, if this book doesn't work or this commentary doesn't work, you know how many commentaries there are? I mean, as
Oh
well as
yeah.
I, for somebody, we've both been in seminary, but like there's, I would say thousands of different types of commentaries.
Yeah.
So, um, all that to say, it's just like, I think you need to do, do yourself justice in respect to making sure your lay people are trained, making sure they're trained efficiently. And then if there's an issue, try to work on that issue. And then, that's all you can do. I mean, realistically, that's all you can do. And if it continues to be an issue, you just you say, hey, we need you to step down because you're obviously not understanding why we're having these conversations. You're obviously not understanding the curriculum or the Bible study material or whatever we're doing. And we would rather you not teach at this point. Maybe you get some additional training. Maybe you get, um, you know, some one-on-one time with a pastor to go over things. I mean, there's so many different ways you can train folks and teach people. And so I don't know, man. It's some people make things harder than they have to be. And I don't disagree that like, okay, if somebody's teaching something that goes against the grain and differs theologically from what we're trying to teach as a church, then absolutely we need to have that conversation and let people, you know, either go or let people get additional training or whatever. And then
Hmm.
at the same time, make sure we're training people
Yeah.
well.
And and I think that's kind of, and I think when we think about the idea, it really goes back to not only make sure you're training well, but when there are issues, how do you approach it with humility and grace?
Yes.
Because you could be teaching something and to realization, and not just from pastor to teacher, but even for teacher to pastor. Because like the example with the church thing, like the secret church thing, like if you're saying, hey, this doesn't go against things, you as a pastor has to realize, okay, I now got all the information, I was mistaken. Or, and even if I'm like, well, I think it's okay, but I still am a little skeptical of it, then you as a pastor, you could just say, like, if I was in that situation, I was the leader and I was having that conversation, It's like, well, do you think I could come to your small group just to
Observe.
observe, be a part of it? Let me just make sure. And then if I still have a lot of questions, then we can kind of talk a little bit more about that. And then you have that open dialogue. And I feel like, I don't know, I feel like with power, you kind of avoid yourself from having grace and humility because then you just feel like anytime when someone challenges you, it's almost like an attack.
Or a
And
threat.
it's not an
Yeah.
attack. I mean, even when we think about some of the letters that Paul writes, and even Paul's talking about how he disagreed with Peter, how he didn't want John Mark on their second leg of the missionary journey or whatnot. Like he was like in, Barnabas and Paul had a falling out. Like it's stuff like that where there's always going to be time there's disagreements, but even in those disagreements, it seemed like that there was conversation, there was discussion, there was changing of minds or changing of hearts, and sometimes there's hardening of minds and hardening of hearts. And eventually they get to the point where it's like, well, what's the best for the kingdom? Well, then maybe it's to agree to disagree. Let's go our separate ways and let's just allow time to kind of help bring things back together if need be. But we're both still doing ministry. We're both still doing the best we can for the kingdom of God. So let's go there. And I think like even with training, like especially now with like AI, I mean, I'm sure there's probably a lot of tools out there. And especially even now with just like your more common apps, like so many times, like even your search engines have an AI component to it, your social media. And I wouldn't be surprised, and I haven't opened up the Bible app on my phone, but I wouldn't be surprised if I've opened up my Bible app that there's an AI feature in the Bible app now where I could type something and it'll give me this whole dialogue of information. And that may be good information that I can share with my people, but I also have to know that this is a artificial generated thing that's sometimes maybe pulling from sources, sometimes it's drawing its own conclusions based on algorithm, and that may or may not be theologically sound to my denomination, to what I'm teaching. So I think at the end that if there are challenges, politely discuss it, learn from the people who you may have a disagreement with. Again, if you feel like you need to sit in a class just to observe everything, just to make sure everything's good, then as a leader, you should be able to do that, whether you're pastor, elder, etc. And then at the end, and this is probably one of the biggest things that I think irks me within this like new Christian landscape or church landscape, there used to be a time where when you asked people to leave the church, it was mainly because of gross inappropriate conduct. People were mistreating people. They were not being Christ-like. They're like verbally tearing people down, abusing people, stealing money, molesting, sexual assaulting, like whatever the case may be. You're asked, okay, you got to go, and that would be it. Um, so the fact that now we have gotten to the point where we're basically telling people they have to leave the church because you don't like what they're saying or you don't like what they're teaching, to me, I feel like that is kind of wrong. Because for me, if I'm a pastor and I don't like what someone's teaching, I'll warn them and say, "Hey, that's not it." At the end, and then I may pull them from teaching, and then at the end, I may say, your views fit more with this type of denomination or these couple denominations than with us. And I think as a pastor, I really think that if you want to thrive as a teacher, if you want to thrive within your own faith, it may be better suited for you to try to go to one of these churches because it's going to fit with kind of your theological thinking a lot better than we do. And you again, you approach that with, I love you, I care about you as a brother or sister in Christ, but I think you may thrive a little bit more in this setting because they have a more of a theology that's going to fit with your thinking than we here at this church does. And I think that's always a better approach. And I mean, it's always been my philosophy that the best approach is with humility and grace and understanding. And if you can do all those things and you still have to come to the term where there has to be a dismissal or a separation, um, then that's the way it be. But at least someone comes out of it not feeling like I'm very confused because I thought I was teaching the Bible and I was just told that I had to leave because I wasn't teaching the Bible and I don't know what happened.
Yeah.
Because those people who have been in those situations, they're still kind of feeling hurt. They're feeling reeling because I thought I was doing everything right, and I was told I was doing everything wrong. And instead of correcting me or showing me the errors of my way, I was asked to leave, and now I don't have a small group. I don't have a church anymore. I'm just kind of out in the wild now.
Well, and that also leads to church hurt and people being resentful of the church, people not going to church, people walking away from the church. Um, and it only takes one little thing like that to where somebody gets their feelings hurt, like legit get their feelings hurt.
Yeah,
And you know, it's real life. I mean, that stuff that happens. I mean, it really
yeah.
does. And the last thing I want to say is that, you know, I I think too, we are so quick to point the finger.
Mm,
We're so quick to judge. And then like, a lot of times when we hear of, stories such as these, it's not the pastor that's going in there and, saying, "Hey, we need to have a conversation." It's a group of just lay people going in there and they want to point the fingers and they want to do a witch hunt and they want to, make sure they're looking for an excuse to get this person out of the church. And that's not okay either. And um I I've seen that time and time again, and I'm sure that you have, where people just roll right in and be like, you know what, this person heresy, right? This person, is not doing the right thing, and we want them out of here, and blah 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 blah. And it's like, bro, calm down.
hmm Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
anyway,
So I think kind of in conclusion, if you're a teacher, if you're somebody who's leading a small group or teacher, do your due diligence. Not, make sure if you're using a curriculum, if it's been approved, make sure that it's approved by your church or at least it fits with theology. Um, and then also, if you're using tools, make sure you're using good tools. Again, there's a lot of tools. And I know most of us have regular jobs. If you're a teacher, you're not like a paid staff member. Like, I know time is short, so you don't have a lot of time to study. But again, just try to do your due diligence just to make sure that you don't get called out for doing something false when you're like, well, no, I am doing my part. And then for those of us who are pastors or elders or leaders, when you run into a situation like that, make sure you are confronting it not as seeing that person that they are completely undermining you or they're destroying the church or whatever, but come to it as okay, let me figure out where this person is. Let me figure out what their thinking is. Maybe, and not only that, but let me try to work with them and get them back on the right track of thinking because that's what the Apostle Paul did. That's basically Paul's letters. Paul didn't say you guys aren't representing Christ well. We no longer recognize you as a church. You're done. Like he had to tackle people. He had to say, hey, you guys are doing some things that are not reflective of the teachings and the will of Christ. So you need to make these changes. And Paul was always, as brutal as he was with the pen, he also had a kind and compassionate heart to really see the church thrive. So he always had to rebuke and try to lift up and restore some of the churches who have fallen away from the path. At the same time, as leaders, make sure you come with humble hearts, humble minds, and make sure you try to really understand. And even at the end, if there is still, do your due diligence, recommend other places that those people can serve, whether it's within your church or maybe churches that may fit their teaching and demographic later on, because that might be something that might be more impactful for them, that can help them grow, that can help them strengthen their faith. And I think when you do that, they'll be more appreciative because you really see, hey, maybe what you're teaching doesn't necessarily fit with our brand of Christianity and church, but you could definitely be a huge asset to the church next door that does have a similar view or similar thought process as you. So do your due diligence if you're a teacher and make sure you're using correct sources and everything is good with your denomination. And as leaders, if you run into problems, always approach it with mercy, humility, and grace. And I think we won't have these issues where people are kind of going, well, I'm no longer teaching. I don't know why. Now I lost my small group and I lost my church and no one's talking to us. And now we're kind of dealing with our wounds when there really didn't need to be any woundedness in the first place. And if so, maybe a few scratches here or there, and that's it.
Yeah. I mean, that's a good way to put it.
Yep. So, friends, thank you so much for listening to the Scott Stedman podcast. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your weekend and week. And we'll be back on sometime with another episode. Take care.
Thank you for listening to the Scott Stedman podcast. The Scott Stedman podcast is made possible by support from our listeners. We thank listeners like Patty and Scott, whose support goes to this podcast's continual growth and maintenance. If you want to support this podcast, you can do so in a number of ways. First, feel free to give us a 5-star rating if you enjoyed this episode and share it with your friends. If you'd like to financially support the Scott Stedman podcast, you can go to the website ko-fi.com/the Scott Stedman podcast. That website again is ko-fi.com/the Scott Stedman podcast. Thank you so much for listening.